Last week, we looked at Jarmo Kekalainen's career highlights. This week, we're looking at Jarmo's career lowlights, and there's less of them than expected. So let's get into it on Locked On Blue Jackets.
You're Locked On Blue Jackets, your daily podcast on the Columbus Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am, as always, your host, Jay Foster, here to give you the good, the bad, and the ugly about your favorite team and mine, the Columbus Blue Jackets. Before we get started, I want to thank everyone for making this your first listen of the day every single day. Locked On Blue Jackets is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers are going to get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. And of course, you can find Locked On Blue Jackets wherever you get your podcasts on YouTube and on SiriusXM. So this episode a little bit later than planned because of some scheduling issues, but it's time to talk about the later years of Jarmo Kekalainen, if I'm being honest, because I think the early years, pretty good. And even, all the way up to like 2019, 2020, I really do think it's weird because I think the Johnny Gaudreau signing was one of the best things that he could have done for the franchise, but it also feels like it was the beginning of the end for Kekalainen. So we're going to talk a little bit about some hiring choices. We're going to talk a little bit about some trades, some contracts. We're going to talk a little bit about kind of why rebuild is such a dirty word in Columbus, where Jarmo was concerned. But where should we start off? Let's start off with probably just the first thing on my list, which is not in chronological order. It's just kind of in the order I thought of things. Elvis Merzlikins, who, again, has looked pretty good this season, but is not playing to his contract, which I don't think he ever was going to play to his contract. I don't know that contract was a good idea when it was signed because it was just after his second ever NHL season. So not a big sample size. They clearly went out and were like, right, this is our franchise goalie. This is the guy that we want in the future. This is the new Sergei Bobrovsky. And I get it. They had to choose between Merzlikins and Korpisalo. They couldn't keep them both. And I'm not saying that Merzlikins was the wrong one to keep, but I don't know that. What does he make? $5.5 million for the next 3 seasons after this. $5.4 million for this season and the next 3 seasons. That's a very rich contract for a guy that, again, had great numbers. His rookie season had a .923, 235 goals against average. And then his numbers have just kind of dropped and dropped. .916 the second year. I believe he signed a 1-year contract and then a 1-year extension. Or a 2-year extension. Oh, sorry. He had a 2-year ELC, and then he signed a 1-year extension, and then he signed the 5-year extension. So we're in the second year of the 5-year extension right now. But his numbers it keeps looking worse and worse. And it's picked up a little bit this season, but I still think that that contract, if you, again, even if you just wait a year, that contract looks a lot better. And I also want to kind of, when we're talking about Merzlikins, the disrespect is the wrong word, even though I do think it was disrespectful, but they seem to have kind of decided, without really talking or communicating with anyone, this is the goalie of the future. This is who we want. Except it's not Merzlikins, it's Tarasov. We want to see what he can do. And we're not going to even let Elvis back up. And I think this was probably a combination of GM and coaching. So, this is not all on Kekalainen, but I do think the way that, Merzlikins has been treated this year has been not ideal. He's being shopped. There's talk of him being bought out. And then he apparently requested a trade and then didn't request a trade. And just, I don't know, the whole thing has kind of, it wouldn't surprise me if this left a real bad taste in Merzlikins' mouth. And again, I think he's finishing out this contract here. I don't think that's a tradable contract, which again, you can go back to, should Kekalainen have signed it in the first place? Probably not. Buyout, a little rich, for the Blue Jackets' taste. I wonder if he leaves in free agency after this contract is up, and like you could decide among yourself whether that's a good idea or not. But that was kind of the first thing on my list. Like, kind of the issue that I had was the Merzlikins contract, and then the way that they handled it when he started not living up to the contract that they signed him to. Generally speaking, I don't have a ton of issues with the contract that Kekalainen has on the books at the minute. I wouldn't have done the peak contract. I think, again, that's too expensive for a guy that has played like 20 games this season and might not play many more if all of the defensemen stay healthy. The Severson contract, I think, is fine, but again, it's probably $1 million too much and a couple of years too long for my liking. But you pay for free agents, and that's essentially what Severson was. They traded him to have that extra year of free agency so they could get him for 8 years instead of 7. I still don't really know why they needed to do that, but hey, it is what it is. The Werenski contract, I think, again, is a little bit too rich, but I kind of fall on the side of sometimes you have to pay the stars to get them to stay. He would have got less money somewhere else, probably, but he wanted to be in Columbus. They wanted to keep him in Columbus. They just lost Seth Jones because he didn't want to stay long-term in Columbus. And so they signed Zach Werenski to probably a bigger contract than, again, I think he's worth, but we'll see. That contract could work out. I don't expect it to, but it could. I do think, again, I bitched and moaned about the Gabranson contract. That's kind of the last one on my list here. But frankly, this season, I think he's paying for it. I think last season it was atrocious, and I was mad that we had to put up with this for another 3 seasons. I think Gabranson has very quietly been one of the better defensemen this season. He's playing way less, which is great. He's playing on a lower pairing. He is probably still playing a few too many minutes on the penalty kill, but great in the room, great leader. I think has kind of quietly been one of the voices that's kept the room together if in the aftermath of, the Babcock stuff and the, Vincent. But the Vincent thing is not really an issue yet, but I think Gabranson has kind of he's been worth the money that they paid him this season, which was not true last season. So, like, again, would I have signed that contract? Probably not, but it is what it is. He's here, and right now I'm not mad about that. So overall, contract not terrible, but many contracts I personally wouldn't have signed, and like maybe that's why I'm not an NHL GM. I don't know. But then he has had some good contracts. I think the Boone Jenner contract was great. He's making $3.75 million for the next 2 seasons after this. The where'd it go? The Boquist extension, I think, has been fine. Tarasov extension, I am fine with. I think that's a tough one because obviously he's in the program right now and he has kind of been up and down. But actually, you know what? Let's talk about the Laine situation because this kind of ties into something else, which is Oliver Bjorkstrand being traded. And it's still not what I would have done. And it feels unfair to kind of put that on Jarmo's lowlights because his hands were tied, but that's kind of what I want to talk about next. So we'll do that in just a second here on Locked On Blue Jackets. First up, I'm going to tell you about Gametime because I was just at the Sharks Blue Jackets game on Saturday, and you better believe that I went to Gametime for those tickets. Competing ticket services are just not as good. Gametime is fast, it's easy, they've got last-minute deals, they've got views from the seat, they've got a best price guarantee, so if you find tickets in your section and row for less, Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. They're the only ticketing app that gives me complete peace of mind. I don't have to pay any, hidden fees, again, other ticketing services that we won't name. But right up to the start of the event, they've got great deals, last minute seats. So if you get out of work and you're like, hey, I wonder who the Blue Jackets are playing tonight, go to Gametime. You could get tickets basically immediately. It's great. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Welcome back to Locked On Blue Jackets. We're talking about Jarmo Kekalainen's career lowlights today, and we've talked about some of the contracts that he's handed out. And within that, I wanted to talk a little bit about Oliver Bjorkstrand, because they went out, they signed Gabranson, which led them to signing Gaudreau, and then they re-signed Patrick Laine, and suddenly there's no more money for Oliver Bjorkstrand. And like one of those contracts had to go. And I think the thought was, what if they trade Gus Nyquist? What if they trade there was another player that they were trying to trade and couldn't, and I don't remember who that is off the top of my head. Sorry about that. But there was a handful of contracts that they tried to move and couldn't, and eventually realized, okay, Bjorkstrand is that's the one that they've got to move without like if you have to move Nyquist or someone else, you're gonna have to pay probably a first round pick to move that contract, and that first round pick would have ended up being Adam Fantilli. So I don't blame Kekalainen for trading for Bjorkstrand. I think in hindsight it was the wrong move, but you know, they say hindsight's 2020. I can't say that I wouldn't have done the same thing if you were like, right, okay, Bjorkstrand or Laine, like who do you keep? I don't know that, like now probably I would say, oh yeah, keep Bjorkstrand, because I think that he's what this team has been lacking, which is a guy that makes people around him better. And Laine has not really had the best luck in Columbus, so feels a little bit mean to put the Bjorkstrand trade on Kekalainen as like this is why he was a bad GM, but like that's not really what I'm saying. It's just it's definitely in the lowlights, in the same way that like sometimes when you're playing defense, you trip over and the guy skates around you. Like that's kind of what it is. It's not like an unforced error. It just is what it was, and it sucked. And if we could get Bjorkstrand back, he might be like the player that I'm like, man, I would trade a not insignificant amount of assets to get a guy like Bjorkstrand back, or specifically Bjorkstrand. I think he would be great on this team right now. A Gaudreau, Jenna, Bjorkstrand line, I think, would just be a ton of fun. But he's gone. He's not coming back. And that's why he's on the lowlights. One more player-related one, which, again, is something I talked about kind of at the end of his highlights, which is, like, Jarmo's biggest problem was impatience. And this is something that we talked about on yesterday's episode with JD Young of Locked On Sharks as well, is that Mike Greer is not being impatient yet. The GM of the Sharks. That might change, but they've committed to the Sharks being bad for the next 3 or 4 seasons. I think Kekalainen saw Johnny Gaudreau available and then decided, let's kickstart this rebuild. But they've really only been in for about 18 months. Not that they've mentioned that, because they still refuse to say the word rebuild. It's like retool or regroup or regather or literally anything but the word rebuild, despite the fact that that's what it is. You've had 3 straight top 6 picks in the draft, like, and you're probably going to get another one this season. It's a rebuild. It's fine. You can call it a rebuild, but they signed Gaudreau, and I think that gave them the jump. And I think some of it was partially that he felt like he had to try and save his job, and so that's why he went out and was like, hey, we need to make the playoffs. We're going to trade for these 2 big, heavy defensemen that don't get injured, and we're going to play them instead of our youth, and we're going to make the playoffs. And it clearly didn't work. I understand what he was trying to do, but I don't know that you needed to go out and get both Ivan Provorov and Damon Severson. Like, in isolation, I think they are fine, if I'm being brutally honest. I think I would prefer to have Severson over Provorov. Just because I think Severson is a little bit more well-rounded of a player. I think he's got offense and a little bit of defense. I think Provorov's offense is better, but his defense is worse. So, like, I would probably take Severson over Provorov, but I still think that contract is too long. It's a little bit too rich. And I don't understand trading futures away for Provorov. it didn't make sense because again, now all you've done is they already had a backlog of defensemen, Boquist, Bean, Blankenberg, uh, Peak, Jiricek now, Denton Matejchuk is going to be in the mix next season. Like all of these players that needed somewhere to go, and instead of clearing space for them, they just brought in new blocks to stand in their way, and that's frustrating for many, many reasons. And I've said this like 7 times in a row. I don't understand why they felt the need to do both. Beyond literally Jarmo trying to save his job by rushing the rebuild and maybe getting another contract extension out of that. Who knows? That's kind of the last player one that I have. I have a couple of thoughts on some coaching hires and some similar moves, but this is kind of the big one for me, and maybe I should have finished with this. And again, it's what I talked about it yesterday. I talked about it on Saturday's episode, I think. The refusal to rebuild is really what killed any chance of an extension, I think, because I think if they had committed to sucking last season, this season, then there would be way more slack in the noose, so to speak. And I think like he gave himself just enough rope to hang himself with, and that's kind of the problem here. Is the irony is if he didn't try to win, he's probably still here, but he needed to win to save his job. So like maybe it's a weird catch-22, but that's kind of where I'm at with Kekalainen. Is I get why he did a lot of what he did, but I do think he did kind of dig his own grave in a way. In a minute, we're going to talk about a couple of coaching hires that he made, and we'll see where we go from there. So that's coming up in just a second here on Locked On Blue Jackets. First, I'm going to tell you guys about FanDuel. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers are going to get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. It's $150 if your bet wins. Literally, go onto the site, find the heaviest favorite you can, whether that's NBA, whether it's NHL, whether it's college sports, whether it's NASCAR, whether it's golf, anything. Just find the heaviest favorite, put $5 on it, and if you win, you're going to get $150 that you can use on any bet that you like. They've got quick bets, live same game parlays, exclusive props, and more. Just visit FanDuel.com/locked-on and shoot your shot. FanDuel.com/locked-on. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA, and also us, the Locked On Podcast Network. Welcome back to Locked On Blue Jackets. We're talking about Jarmo Kekalainen's career lowlights, and this might be the least controversial one, but he has not hired a good coach since John Tortorella, is the thing. And I kind of, when Brad Larson was hired, we talked a little bit about that, and we talked a little bit about, like, it makes sense because you don't go out and spend a lot of money on a team that's going to be bad. And they knew they were going to be bad in that first year with Brad Larson, and then they ended up overachieving somehow. And I think that gave them kind of false confidence, and then they were terrible the year after, and then obviously Larson ended up getting fired. But I get that you don't want to spend a lot of money on a name brand coach if you know that the team is going to be bad, but I do wonder how much of that was influenced by the fact that Larson was already here, knew the players, knew Torts' system, and how much of that was, again, like the COVID. I know that they talked a lot about how Pascal Vincent got pretty far in the interview process for the Larson hiring, but COVID meant that they couldn't meet as much as they wanted to. They couldn't really push that any further. So I do wonder how much of that was like COVID, but again, hindsight, awful hire, terrible hire. Larson did his best, but just wasn't the right coach for where the team was in their rebuild timeline. I'm still interested to see what Larson would be like, maybe with a better roster, maybe as an assistant on a better team. Who knows? The other coach, obviously, is the Babcock hire, and people have been arguing basically since he was hired about whether it was a good hire, all the way through to he resigned because of the phone drama. Not to like belittle the whole situation, because I do think that the players were in the right here, but Kekalainen, again, it's a similar thing to the Provorov and the Severson deals. It's trying to save his job. He's going to go out there and find the most taught slate coach that isn't taught. And that happened to be Babcock, the proven winner, kind of a hard ass, is going to make the team. He's gonna make the team accountable, is I think the logic behind hiring a guy like Babcock. And again, didn't work out. And now here we are. The Blue Jackets have Pascal Vincent, who had the job for 4 days before training camp started. They gave him a 2-year contract instead of an interim tag, which was confusing at the time, but I guess they didn't want to go through. I wonder again how much of that actually is that they didn't want to go through another coaching search with Kekalainen at the wheel of that. I think ownership and I think John Davidson have had this in their mind for a long time, that this is going to be like, this was the end of Kekalainen, and so they were like, let's just give Vincent 2 years. We don't have to coach Hunt again and general manager Hunt at the same time. We'll deal with that. We'll kick the can down the road. But Vincent hasn't been what many people expected, maybe what anyone has expected. The Babcock hiring, I think, was an awful choice from the beginning, and when it blew up in their face, I wasn't surprised. It was extremely, disappointed, but not surprised, the whole thing. And I still don't know, even if that hadn't happened, I don't think Babcock would have made this team good. I think they would have had the same issues, just slightly different, and I think the media would probably have been more fiery than what it is right now. So when I was looking through kind of Kekalainen's history as a GM, and like he had some questionable drafting picks kind of in the 2013 to the 2012 to 2014-ish range in the first round. And that was really the only thing, bar like the last 2 years, that I looked at and was like, man, this wasn't the dude. And so, his first 8 or 9 seasons with the team were great. I think he overstayed his welcome. I think he got impatient. I think he felt his seat getting hot, and he panicked and tried to save his job. And like, I can respect that. I probably would have done the same thing. I wouldn't have done the exact same things that he did, but I also would probably have panicked and tried to save my job. He just overcorrected, I think, and it ended up costing him his job anyway. So like, I planned for this episode to be like super scathing and like, here's why Jarmo Kekalainen was a terrible GM and why we won't miss him. And like, the thing is, I think we will miss him. I know that, again, a lot of it is recency bias. I think he probably should have been fired after the Babcock debacle. Shocked that he wasn't, but again, I think they just didn't want to have a turnover of both coaching and GM offices at the same time. Interestingly, he might still be doing some work for the organization down the road, whether that might be he might go back to scouting, he might end up in player development. I know he was watching the Monsters this weekend. They're talking about he's going to be doing some work with he's going to be like going to see prospects, I think. So I wonder, like, I'm not sure what's going on there, but I'll be interested to see how that turns out. I do think he and I said this in the episode that I did on Saturday, I think, about his highlights, is that he did leave the team in a better place than when he found it. The bar wasn't high, but he did do it. I think he gave this team a lot. I think he put the team on the map of Columbus, sometimes for good reason. On the map, he put Columbus on the map of the NHL, is what I'm trying to say before my words got all mixed up. Sometimes for good reasons, sometimes for bad reasons. But he brought this city. Johnny Gaudreau, he brought this city Adam Fantilli. He has done a lot of good for this team. It just sucks that the last 2 years was so bad that I think it's erased a lot of the good that he's done for a lot of people. And that's frustrating, and that kind of sucks for him. He's not done in the NHL. He'll be back, whether it's an assistant GM role somewhere else, whether it's an actual GM role somewhere else. I think there are a lot of teams out there that look at what Kekalainen did, especially in the draft, and are like, hey, we'd love to have a guy like that on our team. So I'll be interested to see where he goes from here. But that's kind of all I've got for Jarmo's This Is Your Life, Jarmo Kekalainen episodes that I kind of have done. Later this week, I am going to do a deep dive into some of the GM candidates. There's a handful of names that are kind of floating around out there, so I'm interested to see what is happening out there now. But who can say? Who can say? I have been Joe Foster. Tomorrow we're gonna actually I'll do the outro in a way that makes sense. How about that? Tomorrow we are going to be talking about tonight's game, which is the Los Angeles Kings, I believe. So we'll talk about that game. We'll talk about what was good, what was bad. We'll probably look ahead to the Ducks game the following day, unless I've got those games reversed and it's the Ducks tonight and the Kings tomorrow. Regardless, whatever game is happening tonight, we'll talk about it. I've been Jay Foster. You can find me on Twitter at _Jacob Foster, JAKOBFORSTER. You can find the show at LO_Blue Jackets. If you have comments, questions, criticisms, you can email it at locksonbluejackets@gmail.com. Thank you for listening, for making it your first listen of the day every single day. And until tomorrow, make sure you stay locked on.